guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm very excited for because it's a recommendation style video I personally needed about a few weeks ago. That's right friends, I'm going to be chatting through some books that I think are perfect to binge read. So if you're looking for something that's very plot forward, or maybe the perfect book to get you out of a reading slump, I personally think these are some perfect recommendations for that. For the books I have today, they fall into two categories. The first category is they're not only a quick and wonderful read, but they're also quite short, meaning if you're looking for like a quick win to bolster your reading, these could be excellent books to check out. The second category is books that are perhaps a little bit longer, but are so plot forward, they will absolutely suck you in and you will not be able to put them down. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first book I have to recommend is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I have read 3 books now within this series, and I recently picked up books 2 and 3 to get myself out of a reading slump. So I truly feel like this is such a lovely series if you're looking to read something that's not only quick, short, but also incredibly meaningful and impactful. This is a series that centers a very unusual coffee shop. This coffee shop resides in a off the beaten path alley in Tokyo, and here customers have the very unique opportunity to travel back in time. But the rules to travel back are very specific, which results in many people not actually making the journey. This is a series that basically recounts various stories of patrons who make the decision to travel through time, but also the various people who work at this coffee shop as well. It's a very insightful and emotional series that really captures the sort of bittersweet quality of life. It often confronts very emotional moments that various characters that you run into are facing, from great loss and love, and all of these things sort of blend together in such a lovely tapestry of like human experience. The writing style is also really, really nice. It's very subtle and straightforward. It's not like heavy on the metaphor or anything like that, but I feel like it's like stark just recounting of reality and life is just incredibly enjoyable. I really enjoyed the first one, and I've also recently read books 2 and 3 back to back while I was in a reading slump. It's just such a lovely, like bittersweet experience. I really enjoy this series. Another shorter series I would also recommend has to be the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. These books are quite short, but do they pack a punch, and I also feel like are a fantastic series to binge read, and also just something to pick up if you're looking to read something with many installments. This is a series that sort of has an episodic feel to it, but centers our primary main character, Murderbot, who we're introduced to in book 1. Murderbot at the beginning of book 1 has basically hacked its own mainframe, meaning it's now in control of its own decisions and is kind of working against the corporation that created it. But because it doesn't want to be caught, it passes its days still fulfilling its role as a security bot for this evil corporation and basically helps protect humans on these far away planets. However, though, transparently, Murderbot is a little bit depressed. All it really wants to do is watch its favorite comfort shows and not really interact with humans at all. Over the course of this many book series, you see Murderbot take on a variety of very dangerous situations. Book 1 is incredibly explosive, and every book sort of has a different flavor to it, from like a murder mystery to a space adventure. But every single story is rooted in Murderbot's narration, its pursuit of trying to understand itself, it establishing its own life, making friends, and also having to take on like very dangerous sci-fi situations. It's such a great blend of action and lovable, really charismatic characters that you will fall in love with. It has great humor and heart, but also like explosive plot movements too. It's such a fun blend of things, and I have loved this series deeply. Murderbot as a narrator is fantastic. I also highly recommend the audiobooks for these. The next book I have to recommend is definitely one of the most plot forward books I've read in the last couple of years, and that is The Will of the Many. This is a very popular fantasy release, and for good reason, because transparently you will not be able to put it down. Don't let the length of this book intimidate you, because I promise you will just breeze right through the entire thing. This is a fantasy story set in a Roman-inspired fantasy world, and the society here is structured by a hierarchy. Literally, people are grouped based off their social position within this empire. New lands are constantly taken over and absorbed within this hierarchy, but the hierarchy itself also exists exists as the magic system, because the higher you are up, the more will you're able to control from the groups below you, which again manifests itself within power. In this story, we're introduced to our main character Viz, who is living a very complicated and double life, because after his land was taken over by this powerful empire, he will do everything in his power to not have to give over his will to this hierarchy, resulting in him sort of trying to dodge the government. But at the beginning of this book, he sort of gets wrapped up in a complicated situation that pits him in the middle between two very powerful entities. The first entity is an arm of the government that's basically looking to plant a spy within a very powerful military school. They see Viz as an opportunity to sponsor an orphan, send him there, and then they will get information through him. And Viz is in a position where he can't really say no to this. However, though, the other powerful group that's in Viz's life is a rebel group that's also wanting him to cede information over to them. So we're basically watching Viz all throughout book one have to walk this very perilous tightrope between two opposing powers, and also just like trying to survive, do well in his classes, and move up at this very prestigious military school. It's such a captivating and compelling first book in a series that's absolutely breakneck in its pacing. Very entertaining, very likable characters. I personally cannot wait for book two. Another very plot-forward fantasy release that I would recommend is The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. This is a very vibe-centric book that has a very murky and unusual writing style and narrative structure. So if you like stories where you feel like you're kind of being strung along the entire time, this is a great book to check out. This is a story that centers a massive magical library. The setting is all-encompassing and is by far one of my favorite aspects of this story. And the setting of this massive magical library is almost like a character in itself. It has existed through time. It is unknowable. Its size is also unknowable. And we followed two characters that sort of surround this library. First is a girl who grew up in an area called the Dust, but after her community was attacked, she had to flee to the city, and she's now an apprentice to this library. The other main character is a boy who grew up within one of these library chambers, stuck there with just him and his siblings, and they're just kind of living and surviving their day-to-day existence. Somehow, the fates of these two characters' lives become intertwined, and the story begins to play from there. This book heavily centers a mystery. From the very beginning, you're sort of just trying to piece together what in the world is going on. The journey of understanding the scope of this story is so unbelievably satisfying, and book two equally has such a great ambiance and mystery to it that I am truly obsessed with this series. Not only does it have like such a great fantasy world, well-written characters, but just like the what the heck are we doing here vibe that the author is able to continue over so many pages just makes the entire thing so hard to put down. I read this and the sequel so quickly because honestly the mystery is just intoxicating, and every other aspect of this book is also fantastic. Next book I have to recommend is The Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. Isabel Cañas is one of my favorite authors. Her books are the perfect blend of horror, fantasy, and melodrama. They also have such great angst and romance too. As a result of this, I fly through every book she puts out within like a 24-hour span. I fall headfirst into these. I'm addicted to them. And if you love a great balance of like drama, action, horror, and well-written, well-paced romance, you have to check this author's works out. Both of the books that she has released have been 10 out of 10 for me, but this one is a historical fantasy novel that centers vampires. Specifically, it's set on the border between Texas and Mexico, and it's set during a time period where there was a lot of conflict between new white settlers trying to take over existing farmers' lands in this area. And for our main character, she is no stranger to conflict. She's also no stranger to things that go bump in the night, because there is some type of monster roaming the land and attacking people within her community. Everything comes to a head not only as the conflict that's brewing between these two entities is on the rise, but also when a figure from her past re-enters her life. And so begins like the best combination of horror, vampires, and like the angstiest, most dramatic romance that I was on the edge of my seat for. Like, I need all of my horror stories to have just the most delicious historical romance too, and this author just knows how to combine those things. Incredible. 10 out of 10. The audiobooks for these are also amazing. Speaking of romantic angst, the next book I have to recommend is another series I just absolutely breeze through because the pacing of the writing is so good. And that, of course, is Sword Catcher by Cassandra Clare. I have been talking about this series a lot on my channel recently, and it's because I'm honestly obsessed with it. This is by far my current favorite romantasy release. The blend between well-written fantasy politics, well-paced romantic plot lines, and a huge cast of characters. It's just 10 out of 10. There are like 7 different romantic plot lines I'm excited about and following over the course of this series, and all of them have me on the edge of my seat. And Cassandra Clare really knows how to ruin my life in the best ways possible. But the Swordcatcher series is set in a city-state fantasy world called Castellane, and here trading is king. They don't have a lot of land, they don't have a standing army, but they're very powerful from an economic point of view. We follow a large cast of characters. First is a character named Kel, and he is the sword catcher to another main character who is the crown prince. He's basically able to impersonate and stand in for the prince in very dangerous situations. We also follow the crown prince, who's very roguish and has a complicated backstory, if you will. Another main character we follow is Lynn, and she is from a cultural group who is very ostracized within this world, and they're also one of the only remaining groups that have access to magic. Lynn herself wants to be a healer. There's also shadowy figures like the rag picker king and other types of criminals that get wrapped up with our characters. Just the progression of the political plot lines of this are so good. The twists and turns, the reveals, the romantic pairings, the angst, the will they, won't they. I love this series. I gave both books 5 out of 5 stars. I read both of them so quickly. I read them and immediately wanted to reread them. That is how much fun I had. I promise you, you will not be able to put these down, especially if you love romance in your fantasy stories. The next book I have to recommend is a classic space opera option, and that is the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. I have officially finished all 9 books in this epic sci-fi series, and I can earnestly say with my full heart that every single book was an absolute knockout. Every single book caught me by surprise, and every single book was full of heart-stopping action and twists and turns of the plot. I do not know how James S.A. Corey as an author duo was able to progress this plot storyline in ways that not only kept it fresh, but also just like constantly reinvented and reinvigorated the story. It was just a blast to read, while also being incredibly intense. This is a series that follows our main character, Jim Holden, and his crew. And at the beginning of book 1, Jim and his crew basically come across a piece of ancient alien technology. And this sort of sets off a whole bunch of things within the galaxy system that he resides in. Basically, this is set in the near future, and humanity has gone beyond the reaches of Earth. And now there are powerful governments on the moon, Mars, and a series of space stations called the Belt. And there is conflict between all of these governments basically all of the time for a variety of reasons. And when Jim finds this piece of technology, it kind of acts like a spark that just sets off a huge chain reaction everywhere. And we see the consequences of so many different things over the course of this 9-book series. The thing about this series is it is rooted with Jim and his crew and the close relationships and bonds that are formed across all of these characters. The series takes place over a large expanse of time as well, but there's also so many characters, sometimes one-off, sometimes characters you see over many books that sort of interweave and are included within this larger narrative, really providing like a very large and macro experience at the solar system level, while also having really intimate micro level, like emotional and character building moments with characters we get to see and experience over and over again. And that's why I feel like this series was so dang entertaining. There was always an opportunity for new, fresh storylines to be introduced. They felt natural to the flow of the story, but there was also continually building on existing storylines. And as you read through this series, I also feel like you get more and more attached to everyone. It's emotional, it's interesting, and it is very explosive. I don't think I've read anything quite so plot forward as the Expanse series, and it completely entertained me throughout the entire course of it, which I feel like is a hard accomplishment, but they did it. The next book I have to recommend is another shorter horror-leaning story, and that is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, another one of my all-time favorite authors. And honestly, any of her books you can pick up and I feel like would fit the bill perfectly if you're looking for something that's going to really capture your attention and will be a quick read. But Mexican Gothic, I personally feel like I absolutely blew through. It's a really imaginative and interesting reimagining of a classic Gothic horror story, and I really appreciated the new elements that the author brought to this well-known structure and story, and it absolutely creeped me out. And it also has romance. Like, that's what I love about Silvia Moreno Garcia too. Like, she will horrify me, terrify me, but also give me a good romance on the side. And that's what I appreciate and that's what I want. So this follows our main character, Naomi, and she is a very glamorous socialite. She spends her day going to parties, hanging out with friends, these types of things, until one day she receives a distressing letter from one of her beloved cousins who has recently gotten married to a wealthy family on a faraway estate. Concerned about this letter, she decides to go visit her cousin in person, and there she arrives at a horrifying and crumbling estate full of very weird people. Her beloved cousin is ill. No one will give her any information, but she decides to stay to figure out what's going on, and the house begins to invade her dreams. Listen, as a gothic horror story lover, I really appreciated that the author not only relied on like well-known tropes, but again, really introduced some very interesting concepts and themes to these tropes that just like gave everything a whole new life to it. Creepy, vibey, and also a very quick read. Great for the fall season or right now. Then the last book I would recommend that is a perfect quick read that's very plot forward is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is like Sherlock Holmes meets a fantasy world that's kind of inspired by Godzilla and Attack on Titan. It's very strange, very unusual, but the mystery is so fantastic and the character dynamics are so funny. I adored it. This is basically set in a fantasy empire that's surrounded by these massive walls. These walls are incredibly important, and so are the upkeep, because there are these monsters that sort of appear out of nowhere and try to like attack and destroy civilization. And in this story, we're introduced to our two main characters, Anna and Din. Din is Anna's new assistant, and he has had alterations to himself that allow him to have a photographic memory, which works well because Anna is a detective. So he works alongside Anna to catalog various crime scenes and evidence. Their working relationship, though, at the beginning of the story is quite strange. Anna is weird and she's difficult, and so are her requests. At the beginning of this story, they're assigned to a new case in a faraway province where a very powerful engineer of these walls was found dead, with an entire tree like erupting out of his body. So to say the cause of death is very unusual. This kicks off a conspiracy like no other, and kind of following the minds of Anna and Din is just so entertaining. Anna is a very talented, very bizarre sort of detective figure. Again, classic Sherlock Holmes vibes, and their growing camaraderie is such a delightful thing to read, paired with a mystery that had me on the edge of my seat. I was hooked reading this book. I was fascinated by this very strange fantasy world. I was fascinated by this creepy and compelling mystery that combines elements of politics and corruption and power and all of these things. And then obviously it's all wrapped up in a bow with just delightful characters you will fall in love with. I loved book one. I can't wait for book two. I think this is a perfect book to pick up if you're wanting to read something quickly. Alrighty guys, those are some book recommendations if you're looking for something to binge read. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye.